The Amish are a religious sect of people who separated themselves from society beginning in Europe around the time of the Reformation. Their beginnings stem from the Anabaptist movement, and after persecution from both Catholic and Protestants, they fled to Germany and Switzerland. Some groups eventually immigrated to North America, and settlements can be found in 22 states and Ontario, Canada. They emphasize family, community, humility, separation from worldly practices, and being self-sufficient. In 1692, during the division over how to treat members who had violated church doctrine, one group that followed the ringleader, Jacob Ammon, split from the Mennonite Swiss Brethren. His followers became known as the Amish. The first Amish settlers in Pennsylvania arrived in the 1730s. The Amish typically reject modern technology and luxuries while living a simple or plain life. They follow the Ordnung, an unwritten set of rules to live by within the community. Baptism in the Amish faith indicates a commitment to adhere to the Ordnung. These rules can vary by a group of Amish, but failure to follow them can result in being shunned by the community at large as a disciplinary measure. The groups that continue to follow the traditional Amish beliefs are called the Old Order.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
Hey, Darlene, how are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good. So what are you drinking?
I'm drinking my iced coffee from 7 Weeks Coffee.
Yes, and they have sponsored our episode last week and our episode this week. They sent us some coffee to try, and if you would like to support them, please go to 7weekscoffee.com and place an order. They have such a great mission. Your purchase will directly contribute to funding the pro-life movement, one cup at a time. They are affiliated with a network of over 850 pro-life organizations across the country. They donate 10% of every sale to those pregnancy care centers.
Wow.
They source their coffee through direct trade, so it's ethically sourced. That's 7weekscoffee.com. Their slogan is "Drink coffee, save lives."
Wow.
But my very favorite thing about them is their name.
Yes.
The name comes from the fact that at 7 weeks pregnancy, the baby is the size of a coffee bean.
I love that.
And that's when the heartbeat it can first be detected. So I love that too.
Yes.
So please, go check them out. They run sales quite a bit too. And we're enjoying it. It's very good coffee.
It is. Good quality.
Absolutely. With that said, you have anything you want to share with us this week? Anything going on?
My kids are in.
Yeah, you have plans for the 4th?
Yes, all my kids are going to be with us tomorrow. Hopefully, I think Memphis is coming. But Isaiah and Ailey May. Riley's at Disney.
Oh.
I know.
Really?
Yes, she is. So she's excited. It's her first time away from Ailey May.
I was going to say, I'm going to assume she didn't go by herself.
She went with her brother is getting married.
Oh.
And so she's in the wedding and the bridal party. They all went to Disney, Magic Kingdom. This is Riley's first time going.
Oh, I bet she's
my
gonna
daughter-in-law.
love it.
She's very excited.
Nice. And so you've got Isaiah and Ailey May at your house?
Yes, and I have Journey and Elijah. And so I'm so excited.
There's never a dull moment at your house.
No, and I think my brother is coming in at some point. He just tried to call me a couple minutes ago. So he's coming in today too.
Oh, you're blessed to have
yeah.
all of your family around you
I'm
like that.
excited.
That's great. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I did something funny this week. I went back and listened to the very first episode that I did,
Yes.
which would have been our second episode, the one that took place in Liberty.
Yes.
I got to tell you, I cringed so bad. We definitely have come a long way.
Yes. I do that every time I go back and listen to those first episodes.
This was the first time I've done that. And it started out, the intro was great with Curtis. I thought, oh, this was good. And then we started talking and I was just like, oh, this is not good. We did not have the same editing platform, and we didn't know what we were doing with editing either.
No, we did not.
We've definitely gotten a lot better with that. So I almost feel like I need to redo that episode. And there was a lot I didn't tell about that episode.
For some reason, they encourage you not to do that.
Really?
I don't know why.
But I want to.
There's a reason, and I'm not sure what
Probably
it is.
so you can go back and hear how bad you were and how far you've come. I don't know.
Yeah. Just have some grace if you go back and listen to our first episode.
Hopefully, if we get new listeners, they don't start with the first several episodes.
I always think that same thing.
Yeah.
But I have a friend who just started, Joe Rios.
Hey, Joe.
He just started with the first episodes, and he's loving it. So thank you to all of our faithful friends.
Yes, who stuck with us through those painful.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, without any more talking, I am going to start my episode.
Okay.
So your episode last week, which we actually recorded on the same night as we are recording this one.
Yes.
That's the magic of podcasting. It took place in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And so does mine.
Right.
Have you ever read any of the Beverly Lewis books? The Shunning?
No.
Do you know who she is?
Mm-mm.
So she's like a Christian romance writer type person.
Okay, I'm thinking of the story that was based on golly, who was it that married the prostitute?
You're thinking of Redeeming Love.
Yeah.
Not the prostitute. Hosea. Okay. Yeah, not that one.
Okay.
So Beverly Lewis, but she's same genre. Yeah.
Okay.
So she wrote a bunch of books, Christian romance novels. They were called The Shunning, The Confession, The Reckoning,
Okay.
a whole series.
Yeah.
But they all took place in Amish country.
Oh, okay. So I've heard and seen, but I have not read.
Okay. And so most of my ideas of the Amish people come from those books.
Okay.
Or from that movie with Harrison Ford, Witness.
Yes. I've gone to the Amish country several times because my brother lives close to the Amish.
I've never been there.
And yeah, like you're not supposed to take pictures. And my mom is always like sneaking. They're like, they do not want you to take pictures because they believe it's a sin. It's like a graven, it's like an image. But my mom, she has no respect for people's boundaries.
Sherry.
I know.
I want to see her pictures though.
I just saw some the other day, so I have just came up on my timeline. So
Okay.
I'll have to show you.
All right. Well, those media items are what I picture when I research this account about an unbelievable murder in the Amish community.
Wow.
One chilly March afternoon in 1993, so it wasn't that long ago, Richard Zimmer was hauling a truck of grain down a rural Pennsylvania road. As he drove down Sturgis Road near a small neighboring Amish community, he spotted his neighbor, Edward Gingerich, walking along carrying his 3-year-old daughter, Mary, and holding the hand of his 4-year-old son, Enos. Zimmer knew this family well because he actually frequented Edward Gingerich's family's sawmill business. He stopped and offered him a ride. Edward replied that he was headed to his father's house, and he began to get in Zimmer's truck, and then he abruptly changed his mind, telling Zimmer that I walk, I have plenty of time.
Okay.
Zimmer continued on his way, and he soon came up on the Mill Village Fire Department, and they were blocking the road. When Zimmer inquired why they had the road blocked, they asked him if he had seen anyone with a gun. He said no, just Ed and the kids. And they explained that they had been called about a disturbance at Edward's house. The state police had instructed them to wait until they arrived to enter, so they were just blocking the road and waiting and not going in. Within minutes, Edward and the kids, who were on foot, had reached the group, the fire department and the paramedics, and he approached them saying, "You won't understand, but my people will." And he just kept walking. As the fire department were waiting for the state police to arrive, they decided, well, one of us should follow him, and the other two, since he's no longer there, go back to the house and check that everything's okay.
Okay.
And since he was no longer in the house, they didn't wait for the state police. They went ahead and entered it. There, they found Edward's wife, Katie, sprawled on the kitchen floor, her face partially bashed in,
Oh my gosh.
her internal organs in a strange pile beside her body.
Oh my gosh.
And what ungodly horror had happened to cause this, they wondered. A decade before these events happened, an Amish couple, Danny and Mary Gingerich, along with their 8 children, had moved from Ontario, Canada, to a 150-acre farm in Crawford County, Pennsylvania, in 1983. Later, they were joined by 6 other Amish settling families, growing that community in what is known as the Brown Hill Settlement. Danny was Old Order Amish, meaning he followed the old traditions and rejected the more modern ways of life.
Okay.
Danny and Mary's son Edward was 18 when they made the move. While Danny was known to be hardworking, Edward, or Ed, had a different reputation. To those around him, he appeared lazy. He was known to be quick-tempered and sometimes just had a bad attitude. I guess Amish families aren't even exempt from teenage boy hormones, right?
Sure.
At 18, he had already long completed the 8 grades of school that that Amish families require of their children. They don't require them to go any further than the 8th. He was very mechanically minded and ready to learn the operations of his father's diesel-powered sawmill.
While the Amish reject power-driven machinery and cars, they do use gas-powered machinery to some extent. Bottled gas is also allowed for water heaters and appliances because it's considered to rely on a naturally godly source of power and not man-made electricity.
We'll be back after a quick break.
At the beginning of this year, one of my New Year's resolutions was to get my home decluttered and organized, especially my kitchen. Just going in there felt daunting. Even family meals were no longer enjoyable. I knew that I needed help because the thought of tackling it on my own was overwhelming. And then Melody told me about Shannon over at Functional Spaces. And let me tell you that meeting her transformed my kitchen from a cluttered mess to a cozy functional space that I once again can take pleasure in.
Everyone has that one chaotic area in their home that requires excessive time and energy to manage. Many of us can identify more than one. For Darlene, that was just inside her kitchen door.
Yes, everybody would come in and throw mail, keys, and coats all over the counters and chairs. I told Shannon this was such a source of stress for me. Why couldn't everybody just put their stuff away? And she explained that we could easily turn that area into a place of peace and productivity, a true functional space. We added a coat rack with key hooks and a small mail bin, and that has been a game changer. That's just one example of the difference she made.
Functional Spaces is based in the Triangle and serves Central North Carolina. If you're ready to experience that same transformation, go to functionalspacesnc.com and fill out the contact form. You will receive a link to schedule your discovery call to chat about your project area. Again, that's functionalspacesnc.com. Tell her your friends at Hard Times and True Crime sent you. Ed had a knack for mechanical stuff, and the Amish men began to take notice. He kind of became their go-to guy for that type of thing. Ed enjoyed that type of work, and he was not too keen on the Amish way of doing everything the hard way.
Right.
And it was about this time that Ed struck up a friendship with one of their non-Amish customers and neighbors, which was Richard Zimmer. Ed would sometimes fake being sick and go hang out at Zimmer's place instead of attending church. He was not so sure that he held to the same faith as his parents. And he was kind of itching to break out of the confines of that Amish way of life. But then in the fall of 1985, Ed met Katie Shetler. Katie was one of 5 children born to Levi and Emma Shetler, and her father was a well-respected man in the community. At 21 years old, she was just 2 years older than Ed. She was the niece of their clan's bishop, and she was the epitome of Old Order Amish. She followed all their traditions and rules without question. So Ed and Katie began dating, and they just couldn't have been more different. I'm not sure what drew them together. Perhaps it was like the community was kind of encouraging that courtship. Maybe because lack of options for a mate. Mm-hmm. But some people in the community, they did feel like, oh, Katie will be good for Edward because she follows these rules and she'll help kind of keep him in line with the Ordnung.
Yeah.
And Katie was like the last of her siblings who had yet to be married. And at 21, she
old maid.
Yeah, she wasn't getting any younger. She didn't really want to be that old maid, I'm sure. So after they had been dating for over a year, Ed was kind of getting some pressure because he had not made any moves toward marriage yet. And he was supposed to be next in line to get married in his family too. So he kind of was faced with a choice. Like he could have, he could cave to pressure and marry Katie, and that would seal his place in the Amish church. Or he could walk away from that relationship and seek a wife apart from his upbringing. But to do so would mean that he would be shunned for sure. In the end, he just couldn't bring himself to walk away and join the English world. So he didn't want to risk losing his family, and so he decided he would marry. This is not a long process in the Amish world, but there's a lot of details involved with it. So before a couple can marry in the Amish church, they have to jump through some hoops. First, they have to request proper certification of membership from the church. Then the couple has to be, quote, published, and that means the deacons will announce the names of the girl that's going to be married, and then who she's going to be married to. And then the fathers will stand up and announce like the wedding date, and they'll formally invite all the other clans or families in the community to the wedding. And so it's during this time of publishing, the couple, they don't actually come to church that Sunday when it's announced.
Okay.
Instead, on that Sunday, the young woman will prepare a meal for her fiancé, and they will have dinner alone at her home while everybody else is at the church. And then when her family returns from church, she formally introduces her fiancé to her family. She doesn't get an engagement ring. She might be given another token of affection, like a clock or some china.
Okay.
But, they don't really do jewelry.
Yeah. Especially those old order. The old order Amish those are the sect that's over there by my brother. And then we have some of the newer Amish in Florida.
Okay, see, if we had gone to Nashville, you could have taken me over there.
Yes, you would have loved it.
Because I have never been to Amish country.
I love it. I go and buy stuff from them because they sell stuff. Jay and Justina got their dog from the Amish.
Really?
Yeah.
They have an Amish dog. I love that.
He's crazy.
So within days or weeks, the wedding will take place. And so that during those days, the bride-to-be, she's super busy. She'll be spending time helping her mom prepare for the feast, cooking, house prepping. They have to do all that stuff because the wedding's going to be at her home.
Wow.
And she will also make her own dress and the dresses of her attendant.
So no getting pampered, huh?
None. And you're not getting that bachelorette party in Nashville either.
No.
Amish brides don't wear white. Usually blue is their chosen color. And Katie's dress was a mid-calf length, plain cut dress that was blue. And of course, it didn't have any lace or fancy trim on it. The Amish are plain in their dress, and that extends to their wedding attire. And it's not a one-time wear dress either. The Amish bride's dress will become her Sunday attire after the wedding. And most likely the dress she'll be buried in.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
They get their use out of everything.
Exactly. The groom-to-be will, of course, be spending his time just inviting other people to the wedding. Maybe he's preparing a home for them. So these were the things that were taking place leading up to the wedding of Ed and Katie on December 2nd, 1986. It was a cold winter day and rainy. The ceremony and activities would go on all day long, and they actually had guests from as far away as Canada.
Wow.
Katie's uncle, Bishop Rudy Shetler, performed the ceremony. On the groom's part, Ed wore solid black, as I'm sure you could guess. His attendants, and they're called Newhawkers, they also wore black, with the exception of their white shirts, and they don't have buttons. They use hook and eyes. And Katie actually wore a black head covering, which was different than her normal everyday white one.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds like such a serious affair,
I know.
doesn't it? And of course, nobody's carrying any flowers.
Right.
There was no best man or maid of honor because all the Newhawkers have equal standing. The couple was counseled by the bishop. They returned to the room where not the audience, but the wedding attendees. Guests. That's the word. Where the guests were at. And a prayer was said, and then they sat for a long sermon.
Wow. Serious affair.
Very serious. And then the pastor made a formal statement to the congregation. A final prayer was said, and finally the couple was married. Now, not unlike an English wedding, this is when the celebration began. The tables were set with the foods prepared by the women, while the men set the tables up in a U shape. The bride and groom sat in a place of honor called the Eck, meaning corner, with Katie sitting on Ed's left, and that's the same way they'll sit in their buggy, too.
Okay.
The bridal party sat around them, and then they had a feast. I mean, I'm talking roast and potatoes and gravy.
Oh, them Amish can cook now.
And the applesauce and cherry pie and donuts. And
we go to a place in Florida. They have a restaurant in Florida, and it's called Yoder's, and I love their food.
I want to go there.
Yeah, it's great.
Wow. After the meal, the evening continued way into the night with conversation and games. And so the couple, they spent their first night at the bride's parents' house because they had to get up the next morning and help clean the house. And in this case, Ed and Katie actually planned to live with her parents until they could get a house built. Okay. So their honeymoon was basically like visiting various family members on the weekends throughout the dreary winter.
Yuck.
Wouldn't that be so disappointing? I mean, I guess if that's all you know.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
And are they in love?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But it would still be a little awkward.
Yeah.
But okay, whatever. Most people probably have heard of an Amish barn raising, and this is the way of the Amish. So the whole community pitches in on projects like this. So in the spring, the people, they showed up to build Ed and Katie a small house of their own. I'm sure they were both relieved, though, to have their own place.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't long before Katie was expecting their first child. It is said that Ed did not seem too excited about the birth of the child, but he did express hope that it would be a boy. And in September of 1987, Katie gave birth to a 7-pound baby boy at the birthing clinic.
Most Amish give birth in a local birthing center that's built and ran by local Amish. Some do go to local hospitals, and others still give birth at home.
And they named him Danny E. after Ed's father.
I hope he was nice to her.
Well, we'll see.
I mean, never mind. From the beginning of the story, we can tell he obviously wasn't too nice.
Ed did not relish the work that goes into caring for a newborn. And so he began staying out after work late at night, leaving Katie to tend to the baby and everything on her own. And things were not going so well. Actually, Ed barely spoke to Katie, and he left her alone for very long hours, and he just did as he pleased.
That's so sad.
It is.
Poor Katie.
I know. And she didn't quite know what to make of it, but like, what can she do?
Right.
So she just dug deep and tried to manage her household and manage what she had to do. During this time, Ed, he began building a machine shop next to his family's sawmill. He also purchased various motors, machining parts, and items for his shop, but he was beginning to have some noticeably odd behaviors. He was losing weight, having dizzy spells, and he was barely eating. And now, instead of staying away from home for long hours, as he had done right after the birth of their child, a lot of times he would actually come home early in the late afternoon and go straight to bed and just spend hours in their bedroom. And Katie was getting worried, but the others in the community, they weren't really that concerned. If you remember earlier, I told you that some of them thought he was just a little bit lazy.
Yes.
So a lot of them felt like he was just faking sickness to get out of work and out of his family responsibilities.
Okay.
But Katie, she wasn't so sure. I mean, she was witnessing the day-to-day life.
Right.
Behind closed doors. And to her, it was already obvious something's just wrong. Mm-hmm. Contrary to popular belief, most Amish don't totally shun medical care. It varies by family. But Katie, she wasn't so keen on seeking a doctor right away. So she sought the care of a local chiropractor named Merritt Terrell. Now, Doc Terrell, as he was known, and I use that term lightly, Doc, he went by Doc, but he was not an actual doctor. I'm not even sure he was an actual chiropractor. He was kind of a really unusual guy.
Okay.
He was 5'5" tall in his cowboy boots.
Wow.
And he wore a cowboy hat, and he had this piercing blue eyes. And he was just an interesting character.
Okay.
But he did treat a lot of people in the Amish community. His office was a tiny house with a sign outside that simply said, "Drugless Therapy." And the Amish, they were drawn to him because of his simple practices. He did, he's not going to prescribe medicines or x-rays or subject them to blood tests. He had some more unusual methods of treatment. When Ed and Katie saw Doc Terrell for their first visit, they were told to fill out some paperwork first. Doc Terrell then fed that paper into this machine that resembled a fax machine, but it was used to analyze his handwriting. And then it spat out some numbers and codes, which Doc Terrell interpreted and used it to diagnose him from his handwriting.
Lord.
Ed's codes indicated that he needed a toe pulling and a foot rub.
Oh my God.
And then he was given some blackstrap molasses for blood purification and sent on his way.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that Ed did not get better after his toe pulling treatment. And he actually went to more visits at Terrell's office 3 more times, actually, through the fall of 1988. But to no avail, those treatments just didn't seem to be effective. Then, in March of 1989, Katie gave birth to their second son, Enos. Most times, the birth of a baby is like, a joyous occasion.
Sure.
But Ed, he didn't seem to care one way or the other. And that was hard for Katie to understand. And her uncle, who was the bishop, he was starting to get a little bit more concerned about Ed's behavior. And he's like starting to keep a close eye on him. He doesn't really trust him that much. In December of that year, Ed and Katie faced a devastating loss when the Gingerich's sawmill burned to the ground. An unattended wood stove fire was the culprit. And so now Ed's machine shop next door wasn't really as necessary because he was using it for the sawmill stuff.
Right.
So with no identity for himself and his work, he just kind of starts spiraling a little bit. The Amish, they don't believe in insurance. That fire was like a total loss for them.
Gosh, that's terrible.
Yeah. But as you know, the Amish do band together for families in the community, and they did that. Ed was given the financial help he needed to build another mill.
Wow.
This time he had really big plans for modernizing it. But the bishop, while approving the mill, he put strict rules on how modern it was going to be. And so Ed was that kind of dashed his excitement a little bit. When Katie announced that she was expecting, yet again, Ed definitely didn't seem happy. This time Katie gave birth to a daughter in March of 1990. Katie was now 26 years old and Ed was just 24. They named their little girl Mary after Ed's mother. And this was kind of just like a little side note in Ed's life. It wasn't really worth much of his attention.
Gosh.
And he just kept busy with the construction of his new sawmill, which was really his priority and what he was wanting to do. And the new mill was impressive, to be sure. It was fully automated with diesel-powered conveyor belts that would slice right through a log like warm butter. Ed was even able to hire a guy to run the mill for him, so he had more free time. But he didn't use that time to spend with his family or anything like that. Obviously, things still not going well for him and Katie. After 3 kids so close together, he stopped his marital relations with Katie because he didn't want her to get pregnant again.
Golly.
He still barely spoke to her, but when he did, it was crazy talk about leaving their Amish lifestyle. And she did not like that. It really concerned her. She knew if her uncle caught wind of such talk that they would be excommunicated. And then in 1990, Ed met a guy by the name of David Lindsay, who came into the sawmill wanting to sell some logs, and the two struck up a friendship. Lindsay was Christian, and he began talking to Ed about his faith. He was hoping to share his faith with Ed and possibly lead him out of what he felt was a cult and into salvation in Christ. Mm-hmm. One source said that David felt if he could help convert Ed, then the others in the community would follow. So he kind of saw it as a mission field.
Right.
So David became a regular visitor to the sawmill, and each time he would visit, he would witness to Ed. Ed was already confused about what he believed regarding the Amish.
Right.
So he's starting to have like a conflict in his conscience about things. And at this time, he also had some physical ailments that were starting to get worse. Not just, he was dizzy and lightheaded and not eating well before, but now he's starting to have rashes, unexplained rashes, earaches, just various things like that. When his father began construction on a new and bigger house for Ed and Katie next to the sawmill, Ed didn't even help with it.
Wow.
And the bishop couldn't believe it. Like, never before had an able-bodied man not helped with the construction of his own house. Nonetheless, within just a few months, the 2-story, 4-bedroom home was ready to move into. Man, those Amish don't play.
No, they don't.
They get that stuff done fast.
Yes.
And during this time, Ed's aches and pains are getting worse, and so Katie sent away for some herbal supplements for him. But Ed would not take them because he said he feared Katie was trying to poison him.
Oh, no.
You can kind of see things weren't going so well here. And then in March of 1992, something happened that definitely aggravated Ed's physical ailments. And to what extent, we really don't know, but it's obvious that it did do something. It was March 17th. He spent the whole day in his shop degreasing a diesel engine with a product called gunk. And if you know anything about solvents, you know you're supposed to use them in a well-ventilated area. And some of them have to be diluted. Ed did neither of those things. His shop was closed up tight, and it was after 4 p.m. before he even came out. And he immediately, when he hit that fresh air, was struck with lightheadedness and barely made it to his house before he collapsed on the bed. His hands were swollen, and he said he felt like his brain was on fire. He awoke the next day, groggy, and had a vicious headache. And yet, he went right back to the shop and continued working with the gunk.
Oh my gosh.
He stayed inside, closed up tight for another 7 hours. By the time he came out this time, he was like in terrible shape. He went home, his head was pounding. He was having other side effects. He was just in really bad shape. Well, that evening, David Lindsay, the Christian friend, came by the house to inquire about a saw blade. So David followed Ed out to the shop, and when he walked in, he was slapped in the face by that smell of the gunk. And so he told Ed, did you do this without using ventilation? And kind of scolded him for it. However, the two got to talking, and then they stayed inside all evening.
Oh my gosh.
He scolded him, but instead of walking back outside,
Right.
Why in the world? I don't know. But by the time they left, they were both dizzy and had horrible headaches. Well, that night, Ed woke up Katie after he had this horrible nightmare. He jumped up from the bed. He began talking foolishness, something about having to kill the bishop of the old order to make room for a new religion. He claimed to be having visions from God. The devil wants my soul. He's fighting Jesus for my soul, Ed claimed. Katie had heard enough, so it was back to Doc Terrell that next afternoon. And then Ed was given a shoulder rub, a right foot manipulation,
Oh my gosh.
and some more blackstrap molasses.
These people.
I know, that was frustrating to
It
read,
is.
oh my goodness. So they returned home. Ed continued these incoherent ramblings all day. That evening, they attended a church service at Katie's parents' home, and this is when Ed announced that if he left the Amish church, he could be saved. His faith was enough. So I can hear that stuff from his Christian friend coming out and his talking. The bishop and the congregation, they were shocked. Ed was getting ready to tell them his dream, and Katie was like, "Stop! Do not tell them that dream." The bishop said these Christians were the devil's soldiers. He asked Ed, "Are you planning to leave the church and join them?" And Ed couldn't understand why they are so against him. He insisted that this dream was a prophecy. In the following days, Ed's mental state continued to deteriorate. And one morning he woke, and Katie found him spitting at the ceiling, staring at his phlegm hanging from the
Ew.
ceiling. He asked Katie, "What does that say? What's it telling me?"
Oh gosh. Okay, he's lost it.
Yeah. So Katie summoned the bishop, who then summoned the congregation. And when they arrived at the house, Ed was flailing about. He actually had to be restrained. The bishop announced that this was Satan and that the congregation needed to pray for Ed to be delivered.
I mean, it might not have been too far off.
Yeah, I mean, imagine, if you will, an exorcism.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Amish believe in exorcisms, but basically that is what they were trying to do, was
Yeah.
drive the devil out, whether that's the term they used for it or not.
Sure.
So before long, Ed did seem to calm down, and he sat up, and then he went on to bed, and he slept for hours on end. So the bishop felt, okay, everything's okay. But then Ed woke up again, and this time he flung himself out of bed and began running around the room on all fours like an animal, howling.
Oh my gosh.
So now the people are thinking he has gone insane. And so someone sent to the English neighbor's home to call a doctor. They did find one that made house calls. So, and a real doctor this time, not Doc Terrell and his blackstrap molasses.
No toe pullings.
Yeah, no toe pullings this time. Dr. Caldwell arrived. He examined Ed, and he gave him a prescription for tranquilizers. Ed went to bed, but the next day, his behavior more of the same. So Katie finally had to call an ambulance to come get him. She told him her husband had had a nervous breakdown and to be careful because he was acting crazy. As they were trying to get Ed out of the house, he gave Katie this mocking smile. And then really uncharacteristically of her, she hauled off and cold-cocked him in the face with her fist.
Oh.
So hard it knocked him to the ground.
Wow.
But when he got up, it took 7 men to restrain him and get him in that ambulance. And they took him to the ER at Hammett Medical Center in Erie, Pennsylvania. There he was examined and taken to the mental ward, where he was given a tranquilizer shot, which made him promptly fall asleep. The next day, they put him in a private room. They put him on antipsychotic meds. He was finally acting normal. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
Yeah.
But within 2 weeks, they released him home with 2 prescriptions. Pamelor, which is an antidepressant, and Navane, Navain, which is an antipsychotic.
Okay.
And, sometimes it takes a bit of time to like tweak the meds and get just the right combination. And so for a couple of weeks, the doctors, that's what they were doing, tweaking them here and there and adjusting things. But because things were not working right away, Katie just felt like maybe we should have stuck with Dr. L.
Oh my gosh.
So at his 4th psychiatric appointment, Ed, he just refused to take any more meds. And then Katie agreed with him. They didn't feel like those meds were helping. So they returned home. And of course, now they're back at square one with Ed's behavior starting right back up. He was at the point of pulling his hair out, and I do mean literally, because he said he felt like his head was on fire. He was itching. He could get no relief. He would scratch until he bled. By May of that year, he was so tortured that he was ready to kill himself just to end the suffering. And then his threats of suicide prompted Katie to gather up all their rifles and hide them from him. At this point, her family was begging her to get him some real medical help.
Yes.
Finally, she did agree to try a different hospital. This one was in Jamestown, New York. Ed's dad and brothers knew he was not going to go easily, so they waited until he was sleeping to tie his arms together and his feet together so he could be transported. And he woke up and realized he was confined, and he was furious, and he began to scream and resist. All the while, they're carrying this hog-tied Amish man to this waiting vehicle. When they got there, the doctors came out, and they were like really disturbed to see him be restrained like that. They, of course, ordered him like untie him. He gets up. He's able to walk at first, but then pretty quickly he dropped to all fours and began running around again on all fours like a wild beast, destroying everything in his path. They gave him another tranquilizer to calm him down, but before that happened, like he had torn the room apart. IVs were dangling, wires were ripped from the walls, cabinets overturned. This time during the examination, Ed was making wild claims and just talking out of his head and given several medications once again and released from the hospital 10 days later with several prescriptions and follow-up appointments scheduled. Through that summer, he did manage to behave himself, mostly. But during that time, his friend David did continue to witness to him and encouraged him to get away from that Amish cult and that evil bishop. And Katie continued to get him treated at Dr. L's.
Oh my gosh.
When the winter of 93 rolled around, Ed was in just sharp decline. By March 17th, Katie's 29th birthday, she had sought out a special healer for Ed, one in the Amish faith. This man was Jacob Troyer. And he quickly realized his case was out of his league. And he told Katie, he's mentally ill and you need to take him to a hospital.
Yeah.
And she insisted that, no, like, we need you to help him. Can't you give him some kind of herbs or something? And he said, well, I can give you some. And he sent him on his way. And he said, but I'm concerned about suicide and I wish you good luck, but you need to get some help.
Yeah.
On the way home, Ed grabbed his head and screamed, oh my gosh, my brain is boiling over. The next morning, March 18th, 1993, Ed woke up and headed over to his father's house. There was a wedding in the settlement that day, and many people were headed over for it. Ed informed his father, Katie's trying to kill me. Even God hates me. It's my chemicals. They're out of balance. His father didn't know what to say, so he just encouraged Ed to ask for forgiveness. And I know, and Ed exclaimed, he won't forgive me because I'm possessed by the devil. I can't hear God's voice, only the devil's voice and a woman's voice, but not God's.
Oh, gosh.
Ed was desperate. Katie thought they should go back to Doc Terrell's. Remember, Terrell was only a chiropractor and not even really a typical chiropractor.
Or a good one.
Definitely was not a doctor in any sense of the word. But this time, instead of foot rubs, toe pulls, and molasses, he offered Ed some liver pills, quote unquote. Gracious. Ed insisted he needed something stronger for his headaches. He said, I cannot take this much longer. But Dr. Terrell said, no drugs. Drugs are not the answer. Now, do you think that's because he just really didn't have the authority to prescribe any drugs?
Probably.
Or did he really think that, was he against all medication?
I know a lot of people who, they think they don't believe in medicine, but I'm like,
if I had a headache that bad, I can't imagine refusing medication for that.
No.
So sadly, he sent Ed home another time after a head massage and a bottle of liver pills, whatever those were. Katie knew Ed was not well enough to attend the wedding, so she worked out a plan with his father and brother that they would take turns sitting with Ed while each other went to some of the wedding festivities. But they waited until the last minute to inform Ed. Katie and Ed argued about this when he found out, and she insisted he was not well enough to go, that he had to stay home. Well, they had company for lunch at that time, and everybody noticed how odd Ed was behaving. There was an awkward silence, and then Ed announced he was going to go up to bed. He said, "I don't want to hurt anybody. I love everybody." When he woke up later, he entered the kitchen stating, "I have to go to the wedding. It's the only way I can save my soul." And then Katie shouted at him, "No, you're too sick. You won't even take your medicine," which I think the medicine she was talking about was the liver pills. And he said, "Because you're trying to poison me. I have the devil, and you're trying to poison the devil." And then once again, he lay down on his cot and he just went to sleep. Okay, I'm going to give a graphic warning here. Okay, this is going to, so just,
be bad.
Yeah, just know if you're listening, this is going to be pretty graphic.
Okay.
When Ed woke up, Katie was in the kitchen washing dishes with the kids playing at her feet. His brother Danny had gone home to do some quick chores before he was supposed to come back and help Katie. Katie suddenly felt Ed standing behind her. She turned around and asked him what he was doing, and he reared back and slammed his fist right into her face, knocking her to the floor. Katie cried out, "Why did you do this?" "I'm the devil," he shrieked. Their daughter Mary began to cry. Katie, I know, she was only like, I think she was 3. She was 3. Katie yelled at their son Danny, "Go get Uncle Dan." He took off. This 6-year-old kid ran a half a mile barefoot in the snow to go get some help for his mama. But the other 2 kids were left in the room and they saw everything that happened. By the time Dan got back to the house, he found Ed in the kitchen standing over Katie, pummeling her face with his fist. Dan screamed at him to get off of her, but Ed said this was what she deserved. Ed then lifted his right foot and slammed it down right into Katie's face. He then leaned back down and continued to punch her.
Oh, gosh.
His brother Dan tried to intervene, but Ed jumped on him. And after a brief struggle, Dan realized he couldn't even match Ed. He just couldn't do anything about it. So he jumped up, ran to the nearest English neighbor's house to call 911. And he yelled, "A murder is being occurred. My brother is killing his wife."
Oh.
In the meantime, while Dan was out calling for help, Ed went and put on his work boots.
Oh, gosh.
He went back to Katie and began crushing her head.
Oh, my gosh.
With his foot. The right side of her head was caved in. Her brains were spilling out. And the 2 kids were frozen in horror, witnessing the whole thing. That part right there gets me.
That's terrible.
Then when Katie was laying lifeless on the floor, he took a steak knife from the kitchen drawer and made a 7-inch incision in her lower abdomen. He calmly proceeded to reach into the cavity and remove her uterus, bladder, kidneys, spleen, liver, stomach, lungs, and heart. He stacked them on top of one another in a big pile beside her body and drove the knife down through them. Then he got up, cleaned himself up a little bit, threw his Bible into the fireplace, and told the kids to get their coats on. He told them, "I'm taking you to Granddad's, and then I'm coming back to burn this house down."
I'm so thankful he didn't kill them.
I know.
And surprised that he did.
I'm surprised, too. As he walked down the road with his kids, that's when he was approached by his neighbor Zimmer offering him that ride. He started to accept that ride and then said no. And then when he got to that intersection where the paramedics were, that's when he told them they wouldn't understand, but his people would. So one of them followed him as he walked. Now, there were some discrepancies in my sources about the order of events after that, but at some point he came up on the Pennsylvania State Police, and he approached Trooper Robert Rawls and said, "I'm the bad man you're looking for." They put him into the police car, and backup was called. And then they told him to get back out and take off his boots and coat. And when he did, a chunk of flesh fell out of his coat sleeve.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, just the most graphic thing you can imagine. It wasn't long before emergency backup arrived. More officers, of course, and then the media. But most of the Amish people were at the wedding, and they didn't even have any idea yet what had happened. Ed's brother Dan gave his statement to the officers, and then he walked back to where the wedding was taking place and announced to the group that his brother Ed had killed Katie. Once Ed had arrived at the state police headquarters and they began questioning him, they asked him to sign a waiver, and when he went to sign the signature, he signed it, Lord willing. During questioning, most of his answers were incoherent, not making much sense. They tried to make sure, like, he knew his Miranda rights and that he knew he could ask for an attorney, and they would say, "You understand that?" And they never could really get straight answers out of him. But when they got around to asking him about Katie, Ed said, "Well, I believe we can still save her." And they assured him, "No, she will not be able to be revived." The interrogation lasted for about an hour, and of course, they just didn't get much out of him. And so then he was taken to the jail around 2 a.m., and later they moved him from there to a state mental institution in North Warren, Pennsylvania. While Ed had been detained by the police, Katie's remains were sent to be autopsied. When her body was returned to her family, her mother and sisters washed and prepared her body for burial. As they did this, the men were busy digging her grave. The wake of the Amish is typically held at the deceased person's home, but in this case, Katie's home was the scene of a horrendous crime, so her wake was held at her father-in-law's home instead. They did not bury her in her wedding dress, but instead she was wrapped in black linen and placed in a pine coffin. Just as with the wedding, there would be no flowers. The coffin was then placed on a bridge between two chairs for the viewing. Mourners came from Amish communities all over to pay their respects to Katie. Over 200 of them came from Ohio, New York, Indiana, and even Canada. Bishop Shetler gave a 45-minute sermon. Following the sermon, her body was loaded into an Amish buggy and taken to the Grobhof, which is an Amish cemetery. There she was lowered into the ground, and the mourners spoke a hymn. They didn't really sing. They filled the hole in by hand, and a simple tombstone marked her grave.
The Amish consider everyone equal before God and in death, even as in life. They observe the plain practices. The lowly tombstones all resemble each other. None are more elaborate than any of the others.
The mourners returned to Ed's father's house for a funeral meal. It was during this meal that Ed's brother Dan stood up and told the families the details of what had happened that day. He actually told them that while he was fighting Ed and was trying to get him off of Katie, he said he saw him, and they said, "You saw who?" He said, "The devil. He came out of Ed and stood right beside of him." Gosh. And he said that's when he ran for help.
Oh, wow.
Of course, Ed's defense team went to work building an insanity defense. The prosecution began looking for their own expert witness to debunk that claim. Unfortunately for them, one of their own doctors that they sent to examine Ed came away agreeing with the defense. Dr. Philip Resnick wrote to the prosecution team that Ed was severely ill and did not know the wrongfulness of killing his wife Katie at the time of the homicide. The prosecution then offered a plea deal, but the defense team, they were so confident they turned it down, choosing to take their chance with a jury trial. They didn't anticipate that Ed's family and community would shun him. But every single one of them refused to testify for either the defense or the prosecution unless they were subpoenaed and had to. Ed's trial began on March 24th, 1994, and it was history in the making. This was the first Amish murder trial in the U.S. and maybe even the world. While the defense would lay the foundation that the gunk fumes had contributed to Ed's mental illness, the prosecution didn't seem to answer back very effectively. They didn't bring in any expert witnesses to refute the insanity defense. The defense team brought in a toxicologist, Dr. John Spikes, who testified that the gunk fumes had caused organic brain syndrome and that it existed in Ed at the time of the murder. I looked that up, and a lot of the symptoms did match, like the sleeping long hours and the headache and the feeling like your head was on fire, and he did have those fumes for a long time.
Right.
The prosecution barely cross-examined that expert. By the end of the case, the defense had presented twice as many witnesses as the prosecution had. The defense just had a much stronger case.
Yeah.
And in the end, the jury found Edward Gingerich guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but mentally ill. And so then he was the first Amish man convicted in a killing. The sentencing hearing was set for May 2nd, 1994. Prior to that, Bishop Shetler organized the Amish community, and they drafted a petition that read, "About Ed Gingerich. We like Ed Gingerich, but absolutely don't trust him and are seriously afraid of him because of what he did. We want him to stay in Warren County Mental Hospital for good." 60 members of the Amish community signed that petition, including Ed's own father. And everyone at the sentencing hearing was shocked when the prosecution handed that petition over to the judge. The defense team just hadn't been prepared for his own people to take a stand against him like that.
Right.
The judge asked him, "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Ed stood up and said that he was sorry to all the community for what had happened. And then he sat back down. He was sentenced to 2.5 to 5 years maximum.
Oh my gosh.
And he got credit for time served since his May 1993 incarceration. A week after the sentencing, Katie's father got up from dinner one night, told everyone he sure wished he could see his daughter, and went to bed. He never woke up, and he was laid to rest beside his daughter, Katie. In November of 1994, Edward Gingerich wrote that he had been visited by God and had been granted forgiveness. He said it made him feel like singing, and he wanted to shout for joy. In 1998, he was released after he served his full 4-year sentence, but his community did not welcome him back.
Yeah.
So he moved to Harmony Haven, which was an Amish community in Michigan for troubled Amish, where he began working in the machine shop. And his parents continued to take care of his children. But it didn't take long for people in his new community to say that he had several relapses and scared some of them at times. So then he moved to a community in Indiana before he did eventually return to the Brown Hill community in February of 2007.
His original community?
Yes. And his people, they were uneasy about that return for good reason. But I guess they probably wanted to grant a little bit of mercy or whatever. But within 2 months, he was in trouble again after he and 2 of his brothers, Adley and Joseph, were charged with taking his then teenage daughter, Mary, from his father's custody. She had been coerced into going with them, but she hadn't been harmed. So he was issued a $500 fine for that and given 6 months probation.
But the brothers and him.
The brothers helped him. They kind of coerced her away from her grandfather's. And she was probably scared. I mean, she witnessed what her dad did to her mom.
Yeah.
Well, he broke the probation when he used a firearm while hunting, so he was given 3 months in the Crawford County Jail for that. He was considered an outsider by his previous community, and they did not accept him back again.
Yeah.
Then, in late 2010, he went to live with one of his defense attorneys on his team, George Schrock, and his wife, Stephanie. 6 months later, in January of 2011, Ed had been depressed for a little bit, and he assured the Schrocks that he was taking his medication. On January 14th, he went out to the barn to do some work. When he didn't return by 3 p.m., Mrs. Schrock went to look for him. She found Ed hanging from a rope in the barn. He had written in dust, "Please forgive me." His mental illness had caught up with him, resulting in suicide. A very sad ending to a horribly sad story.
Did it ever seem like he was truly sorry for murdering his wife?
I didn't see anything that said one way or the other. So what do you think? Do you think that it was mental illness, or that it was demon possession, or that it was the brain disorder from the gunk?
I believe in demon possession, especially as I've been reading the book of Mark. And I just do. I mean, we tried. It sounds so much better to think that it's other things. I mean, it's so much easier to believe that, and we want to believe that. But, I mean, it's interesting to me how a lot of these schizophrenia cases, especially, and I'm not saying that all schizophrenics are possessed by the devil. That is not what I'm saying. But it is interesting to me that a lot of them have that religious, do you know what I mean?
There's
like,
this link. Not all. A lot of times there's a religious aspect to their ramblings.
where they think they're God.
Or they're hearing voices from God.
And I know personally, I know somebody who stabbed his mother 17 times, who he thought that he was God. and believed that she was trying to poison him and that, she was possessed with a demon. I don't know. That just sound, I think I believe in evil.
I do too.
I believe evil exists.
Definitely. And I do believe, it's in the New Testament. There are several scriptures that talks about demon-possessed people.
And the devil wants people to die. I mean, that's his ultimate goal.
And funny that you mentioned Mark, because there is a verse in there that does make a distinction between demon possession and sickness. I think it's Mark 6:13. I've often wondered about this link because I do think that gunk that he inhaled messed up his brain.
Right.
Obviously, he was schizophrenic. He even said, my chemicals are not in balance. He did believe she was trying to poison him. He did ask for help many times.
Yeah.
He wanted help.
Yeah.
So there is this fine line, but I will tell you, I did a little research because I'm intrigued by that. There's this guy who wrote a book. His name is Pastor Stephen Waterhouse, and he wrote a book called Strength for His People, a ministry for families of the mentally ill. And he talks about 6 factors that differentiate schizophrenia from demon possession. And I've never read these before until I started researching this, and I don't even know how I feel about it. I'm just going to tell you real quickly what they are, because it did give me something to chew on, and I'm definitely going to research it more. But he says, these are the factors, attraction to versus aversion to religion. Because he says demons want nothing to do with Christ. And conversely, people with neurobiological disorders are often devoutly religious. He says irrational speech versus rational speech. And he talks about in the New Testament accounts involving demons, the demons speak in a rational manner. But usually people with untreated schizophrenia speak nonsense and they jump around in their thoughts.
Yeah.
Ordinary learning versus supernatural knowledge. He says demons in the New Testament would speak through people to convey knowledge that otherwise couldn't be known.
Yeah.
Where people with these disorders, they don't really have the ability to know facts that they haven't gotten from normal learning. Normal versus occultic phenomena. There's an aspect to demon activity that's just like spooky, trances, levitation, all that stuff. And those have an impact on others in the room. Whereas schizophrenia, that just affects the person who's got the disorder, not people around them.
Right.
Meaning mentally. And then the claim to be possessed. He said authors who have clinical experience, both with demon possession and mental illness, believe that those who claim to be possessed are very likely not possessed. Demons wish to be secretive, and they don't voluntarily claim to be present. That's what he said. The last one was effects of therapy. It says if prayer solves the problem, then it was probably not schizophrenia. And if medicine helps the problem, then it's probably not demon possession.
Yeah.
I thought, well, that makes sense.
That does make sense.
So I've been chewing on that a little bit.
Yeah. No, that was really good.
So there is a fine line. And again, it's not something we're always, I guess, going to see. I think in this case, it makes me sad because he clearly begged for help and couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And there was an element in some of the research where people were kind of blaming the Christian friend for witnessing to him. But I don't give that in. I mean,
he had other issues going on.
And he had issues before that happened. He was already having issues.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's a horrible, horrible, terrible case. Gosh, that was one of the worst.
Yeah. It just is sad that he couldn't get that medical help if he needed it.
Yeah.
If that's what it would have taken. But what do you think about the gunk and that contributing to it?
Oh, I definitely, I don't know. I mean, obviously, we make these guesses. I've been reading a lot, I guess, about demon possession just because of being in the book of Mark.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of on my mind. And I guess every time I read it, I'm like surprised at, oh, wow, that's demon possession. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is mental illness. There are things like depression. But I don't really know. Those were some hard times.
They sure were.
The way I figure it, if the Ordnung is an unwritten set of rules, who's to say it doesn't give special privilege to listening to hard times and true crimes? And even if it doesn't, well, we're worth being shunned over. Here at Hard Times and True Crimes, we're all the community you need. So make sure you tell everybody you know, even if they're Amish, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.